today's presentation, part of the Building Your Writing Foundation workshop series. This is summarizing. This is the 5th of 7 of our Building Your Writing Foundation workshops. The next two, or the final two for this fall term, are going to be paraphrasing next week, and then there's a workshop on APA in 2 Wednesdays from now. But today we're going to talk about summarizing, which is an important writing skill. It's an important reading and writing skill that you as students will likely come across or be asked to do a few times in different contexts during your academic life at Red River College. So let's begin here. Always starting off with an introduction. My name is Emily Jackson. I'm an academic support specialist with the Academic Success Center. My email is there on the screen. I always say this, but I'll say it again. If you have any questions about this workshop or any questions about ASC supports, such as writing or language tutoring or other tutoring, I'm always happy to hear from you and connect you with somebody who can provide you the support you're looking for. If you have questions about any of the ASC supports available to you, there's also a link at the end of the slide with a photo of our webpage, and that's always a great place to start too. A land acknowledgement before we jump into the summarizing content for today. RRC Polytech campuses are located on the lands of Anishinaabe, Inaniwak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene, and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our agenda for today, we're going to start off by talking about summaries and daily communication. Believe it or not, summarizing is something that we do all the time, whether you may realize it or not. I'll give an intro to summaries. What do we mean when we're talking about summaries? What does it look like? We'll look at a structure, what should be included in a summary, what order of information, and we'll look at some steps to writing a summary, break it down to kind of the most basic, do this, then this, to produce this. And at the end, of course, we always end our presentations with a summary. So today it's summarizing summaries. So let's look at this communication between these two pals, John and Mark. We've just returned from the long weekend, so maybe you had some kind of conversation about your weekend, maybe yesterday or today. But here's an example. So John says, "Hey Mark, how was your weekend?" Mark's response may be, "Hi, I had a very productive weekend. I woke up early on Saturday to get my grocery shopping and house chores done. I studied for today's test and finished my summary assignment for the afternoon. Sunday was a more relaxed day. I finished my book and I went for a walk in the park." Great, reasonable answer. Now, what is this? Let's reflect on some of these questions. Consider the following questions here. So how does Mark begin his summary? He says hi, of course, a greeting. Then he says, "I had a very productive weekend." What information or details does Mark include? And why do you think that information is included? If we look at the details, he follows up this kind of idea like, well, my weekend overall, it was great, it was productive. Then he gives some examples of what he did. He had a very productive weekend, much more productive than mine. He went grocery shopping. He did house chores. You know, maybe he did some sweeping or some dishes, something. He did some studying. He did an assignment for school. Then he talks about Sunday a little bit. Sunday was a little bit different than Saturday. It was more relaxed. He kind of took the day off. He relaxed, he read, he went for a walk, much more leisurely day. So he's provided these details. Now, if we compare or look at these details, he's kind of talking about Saturday, talking about Sunday, and providing some examples about what he did. Do all of these examples make sense? Do they feel like they belong here? Yeah, they do. Now, what information or details has Mark not included in this example? And why do you think that wasn't included? So for example, maybe you could think of what he did do during the weekend that he didn't include. What do we do on the weekend? We eat some food, we get out of bed, we go to bed, we maybe, I don't know, watch some TV or do some other things he didn't include. So it's this summary if we can say that, of Mark's weekend does not include every single piece of information about what he did. That would be very strange if Mark responded to John with, well, on Saturday, I woke up at 9:05 a.m. I had cereal and a piece of toast. And then he went into a play-by-play of every single detail about his weekend. That would be an extremely strange way to answer this question. How was your weekend? So Mark has made choices here in chatting with his friend John about what information is relevant or important enough to include in his response to this question, how was your weekend? So believe it or not, this is a summary. This is a good example of what a summary should do and what a summary includes. So let's break this down a little bit. We could look at that first response, or that first part of his response. I had a very productive weekend. Kind of an overall statement of what he did this weekend. It was productive. That's the overall main idea. We could think about it that way. Then he provides some examples of that productive weekend that he's stated. So some relevant details that connect or relate back to that main idea. Then he provides another, we could say, key point or main idea about Sunday. In this case, it was more relaxed. It was a fun leisure day. And again, he provides additional relevant details that connect to that key idea. So this is essentially a very simple example, but it is a summary. So let's look a little bit more at this. Although summarizing is part of our daily communication, which we may or may not have realized. Of course, it's much easier to summarize our weekend or maybe summarize a movie or an episode of a TV show that we recently watched. But summaries for academic purposes are more complex. So when we're talking about an academic summary, let's be more specific. What do we mean here? An academic summary is a written overview of the main ideas of a larger work. So a written overview of the main ideas of a larger work. And by larger work, this could be anything. It could be a chapter of a textbook. It could be, I don't know, maybe a video or documentary or some sort of source of information that you are using or looking at for one of your courses. So it's a written overview of the main ideas of some source of information. What's the point of summarizing? Why are we even talking about this? Why is this a relevant academic writing skill that's been included in this workshop series? Summarizing can help us do a lot of things. It can help us to demonstrate our understanding of the overall idea of a source. Maybe your instructor has asked you to summarize an academic article. They've asked you to do some reading and then provide a summary, maybe in oral or written form. Well, if you are able to summarize this complex, larger source of information, that absolutely will demonstrate your understanding of the key ideas or the purpose or the point of that source. Summarizing can also help us to highlight the overall idea and main points for an audience. So when we are writing maybe an essay or some sort of report, we may need to summarize a separate source of information in order for our audience to provide that information for our audience. You cannot cut and paste an entire study or a massive series of data into a short report, but you may have to summarize that data for your reader, for your audience, for that report that you are writing. Summarizing is also an important skill because it can help us it can prevent us from getting lost in the minor details. So it can help us to focus on, if we understand the author's purpose or the author's point, if we're reading something really complex or something that's very new to us, focusing on providing or producing a summary of that larger work can help us to make sure we understand the context of the greater ideas within that text or that source. And of course, it can help us integrate research into our own writing in a clear, concise way. So again, this idea of taking something maybe complex, maybe very long, doesn't always have to be long, but providing a summary focuses on the main ideas of that. Now, you might be starting to think about how does this relate to paraphrasing, or how is it different than paraphrasing? And those are excellent questions. And I think it's very important when you're learning how to summarize and why we summarize to also learn and talk about paraphrasing. But we'll be doing that next week. So I hope that you're able to join next week as well to learn or watch the recording of next week so that you can contextualize the differences and the different functions of summarizing and paraphrasing. But today it's all about summarizing. All right, so the qualities of an academic summary. Hopefully you now have a bit of an understanding of what a summary can do and maybe some examples of when you would want to summarize or when you may be asked to summarize. But what does an academic summary include, or what are the qualities? They should be short. A summary should be short. It should be objective. And it should be in your own words. So let's talk about each of these qualities. When we say short, typically a summary is going to be about a paragraph, but it could be longer depending on how complex or long the information you are summarizing is. So if you're summarizing an entire chapter of a textbook, there are going to be a few main ideas within that chapter. So maybe that chapter, the summary of that longer chapter would maybe be 3 or 4 paragraphs. Although your instructor might say summarize it in 1 paragraph, and then you have to make decisions about what main ideas you are going to include. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can do that later. And as a reminder, it says here you should always follow your instructor's instructions. But the rule of thumb that I've heard before and that I often recommend when working with students is that a summary is a quarter length of the original or less. So it should never be longer than that. So if you're summarizing 1 page of information, that's 4-ish paragraphs or 3-ish paragraphs. Your summary should not be longer than 1 paragraph. You should be able to reduce the information to its main ideas. All right, let's talk about objective. So what does it mean to be objective? Objective is the opposite of subjective. So a summary must be objective. This means that your opinion, your feelings, your thoughts, maybe your experience with the topic that your summary is about, should not influence the summary in any way or be included in the summary. So this means that your summary must be completely based on what the author's view is and what the author's main points are. Maybe you are summarizing something that you completely disagree with. Unfortunately, you may have other opportunities to share your opinion about that topic or that text or work. But if you are asked by your instructor to write a summary of something, they don't want to hear what you have to think about it. You have to remain objective. You have to keep your opinions out of the summary. Maybe your instructor asks you to write a summary of an article and share your opinion. Well, those are 2 different things. You're being asked to write an objective summary, because summaries are always objective. Our feelings are not included in that writing. And then after the summary, reflect and share your own opinion or ideas or experiences that relate to that topic. So don't be confused if your instructor says summarize and share your opinion. That's fine. Summaries are always objective. This is where I'll give you a little preview of next week. Summarizing and paraphrasing can be very different, and this is one of the key pieces, but we'll talk about that more next week. Now, in your own words. So summaries should be written in your own words and should not use language that is word for word the same as the original source. If you do that, that would be a quotation. But when you are summarizing something, you should be able to pull out the main ideas, look at those main ideas or main idea, and reflect on them and write them in your own words. Again, we'll talk about a little bit more about how to do this next week, but remember that summaries should not include quotes or be based on quotes. A summary should be written in your own words. Now let's talk about the structure. So the first sentence of a summary, let's imagine we're writing a one paragraph summary like I suggested earlier. The first sentence of a summary should include an opening line that identifies what is being summarized. That could include the author's name or authors' names and the title of the source. Often we also include what it is. You know, it's an article, it's a documentary, it's a something. What is the thing? The first sentence should also include a statement about the overall idea of the source. Okay, so we'll look at an example in a moment here. After that kind of first statement with that information, what comes next? How do we wrap it up? Well, a summary should include all the main points or ideas in the work, but avoid smaller details or ideas. And when I say smaller details or ideas, this could be examples. This could be information that is related but not directly connected to the overall main idea. Maybe some context that doesn't need to be included in the summary. And so those kinds of details or smaller ideas should not be included in your summary. They shouldn't make it. The summary should just focus on the main idea and the most relevant details or information that connects to that main idea. Your summary should end with a sentence that restates the overall idea of the work. So we complete that circle. We start with the main idea and we end with the main idea. So let's look at an example. We'll kind of go through some steps that you can use to write a summary. And as we go, we'll build an example of a short summary, short, objective, and in our own words. So the first step, always make sure that you read whatever you're supposed to be summarizing. If we don't read and take the time to understand what we are reading, we will not be able to provide an accurate summary. Next is a more tangible step. I always recommend using some sort of method of highlighting and crossing out information. If we are looking at a more complex or long work that we're supposed to be summarizing, it can be very challenging to stay focused on that main idea. Highlighting information that feels like a main idea, highlighting information that feels directly relevant or related to that main idea, and crossing out examples, small details, context, extra information, just physically crossing out that info can be a really helpful way of starting to think about what should be included and what you're going to leave out of your summary. This is often something that students struggle with because they're worried that they're not including the right stuff or they're including too little or too much. So I think that beginning that highlighting and crossing out process can be a really good way of kind of having an overall at a glance view of what you are summarizing and kind of working down, right? Keeping that crossing out, keeping trying to cross out material so that you are not left with a summary that includes, too many details or too much context. Once you've done that crossing out and highlighting, it's good to get that first statement out of the way, that first sentence, where you introduce the source, state the main idea, and then you can fill in a summary, or you can fill in the summary with the remaining details and write that closing statement at the end. But it's important that it starts strong. All right, so let's go through these steps and look at an example. So first, reading and identifying the main idea of the text. As I said, it's very important to make sure you understand this. So you may have to read it more than once. You may need to have some sort of dictionary or Google open so you can be learning new vocabulary that's necessary to understand the work. When you're doing this, it can be helpful to identify the topic and the main idea. And yes, they are different. So let's look at this chart here. The topic is the big idea that the author writes about. The big idea. We could usually express that in 1 or 2 words. It's the general subject of a work. The main idea, on the other hand, is a statement or a claim that an author makes about a topic. And it's what the text is about. So this is where we start considering some of these PACT questions, which you may have heard about before, PACT. Purpose, audience, context, tone. So those questions, asking yourself the purpose of the work, who's the audience for the work, what's the context, those kinds of questions can help us identify the main idea. What is the author saying about the topic? That's the main idea. So when we express the main idea, it's not just a sentence or two. It's usually, or sorry, it's not just a word or two. It's usually a sentence or two. It's more complete and more specific. Sometimes it's very difficult to identify the main idea, especially if we are reading something very unfamiliar or it's very complex. So identifying the topic, that can be a great place to start, and then working to ask those packed questions about the purpose, audience, context, and tone of the work can help you identify the main idea. So let's look at this example. I'm going to read through this. It'll take me a minute, but I'm going to read through these 3 short paragraphs from this article by Joseph McCrossan. And I want you to think about the topic and the main idea. Okay, so this example is adapted from Benefits of Reading, Positive Impacts for All Ages Every Day by Joseph McCrossan. It's a gym for your brain. The act of reading is a remarkable mental feat, and reading comprehension uses a lot of your brain power. When you're thumbing through a novel, you're building a whole world of people, places, and events in your mind and remembering it all as you follow the story. This gives your imagination and memory a thorough workout and strengthens networks in various other parts of your brain too. It's well known that your memory improves with use as new memories are created and connected to older ones, making them stronger and easier to recall. Scientists have even found that the other parts of the brain activated by reading can continue to improve days after you've stopped reading, meaning even just a little bit of reading can go a long way. Besides supporting brain development, it's not most people's first idea of a relaxation technique, but reading does an awesome job of helping you manage stress. According to research, reading can lead to a lower heart rate and blood pressure and a calmer mind, and just 6 minutes of reading can bring your stress levels down by more than 66%. All right. So I hope you were thinking about the topic and the main idea. So let's see what I've got here. Now I'm starting to do this highlighting process where I'm highlighting what I think is the main idea. So I've highlighted here, you'll notice the title or the heading. It's a gym for your brain. And I've highlighted chunks of the first sentence. Little tip, the main idea is often stated near the beginning of a work, particularly when you're reading something that is academic or written for an academic audience. Usually the main idea is stated early in the work, as opposed to maybe a more journalistic piece or persuasive piece, which may, work towards the main idea at the end. But usually academic or information sharing types of sources will provide you with that main idea pretty early on. So the chunk I've highlighted here, reading is a remarkable mental feat. Reading comprehension uses a lot of brain power. And I've highlighted this idea that it's a gym for your brain. Reading is a gym for your brain. So the highlighting and crossing out has begun. So let's continue to look at these examples. So you'll also notice now I've highlighted some additional ideas. This idea that strengthening networks, that reading strengthens networks in your brain. I've also highlighted some pieces here that memory improves when we use memories and connect them to other memories, old memories. Other parts of the brain activated by reading can continue to improve your brain after you've stopped reading for many days. So these are some of the details that I felt were the most relevant to this idea that reading is a gym for your brain. You may not have identified the exact same if I'd asked if I'd given you 5 minutes to do this or 10 minutes to do this and asked you to take out a highlighter and a pen and highlight and cross out. You might have highlighted things a little bit differently. That's okay. The important thing here is that you've identified the topic, reading, benefits of reading, and the main idea, and that you have been able to identify some of the most relevant pieces that connect back to that main idea, that reading is a really important mental process for your brain and that there are extreme benefits that you can experience if you read. Okay. Now let's look at what I crossed out. That first section in the first paragraph that I crossed out, I crossed it out because it was an example. If you're thumbing through a novel, right? Thumbing through is the kind of informal way of saying reading or skimming something. So I crossed out that example because it doesn't need to be included in the summary. It's an example of a time where you might be reading. When you're reading a novel, you're picturing the characters, picturing the places. That example isn't necessary. It's too small of a detail. It's not relevant or big enough of a detail to connect to for it to make it into my final summary. You'll also notice that I've crossed out the entire last paragraph of this summary. It's gone. I've crossed out the entire thing. The reason I did that, I decided to remove that main idea, or that paragraph, because these three paragraphs, two of them are about memory and ways that this can improve your brain, right? That reading benefits your brain this way. The last paragraph, the topic kind of changed. You may have noticed the signal words beside, right? Besides this, that's introducing a new point or a new main idea. And that last paragraph is all about the way that reading reduces stress. That's important. I think that's very important. That last statistic, for example, that it can reduce stress by 66% is an amazing statistic. That might be interesting to you. It certainly is interesting to me. However, it doesn't directly relate back to this idea of improving your brain by reading, right? It's a gym for your brain. This is a new idea, this idea that reading also reduces stress. You might think of this as maybe like a side note. So that's why I decided to cross this out. Would it be wrong if you maybe included a sentence in your summary that mentioned stress? No, it wouldn't be incorrect. But I think that it's very important when we are summarizing to be very critical about whether an idea relates directly to the main purpose or main idea of what we are summarizing. And if it doesn't, if it's a loose connection, consider cutting it from your summary. A summary is not just taking every single paragraph and reducing it to one sentence. Lots of students do this. They take each paragraph within a textbook, let's say, if you're writing a summary of a chapter, and they make it into one sentence. This isn't a good way of thinking about summaries. You need to be a bit more critical when you think about whether it belongs. Is it necessary? Is it directly related to the author's main idea of the text? And in this case, I decided that although another benefit of reading is reducing stress, that is too different or just not connected directly enough to this idea that reading is like exercise for your brain and that you can improve your brain's strength by reading. All right, let's keep going through this example. So let's write the first sentence based on what we know that first sentence should include. It should include the name of the author, the source, and it should state the main idea. So the reminder, the heading was it's a gym for your brain, and the whole main idea is this idea that reading is like exercise and it can improve your brain's strength over time. So here's a sample first sentence of what this could look like. In the article, Benefits of Reading, Positive Impacts for All Ages Every Day, author Joseph McCrossan discusses the ways that reading can support brain development throughout our lives. Again, if I'd given you a few minutes to do this, we all would have something a little bit different, and that's okay. This isn't the only correct way to do this, but it does check the boxes of including the title of the source, the author of the source, and the main idea. Now we need to complete our summary. So we need to collect the details that we highlighted in step 2 and add the relevant details. And of course, wrap up with that main idea sentence again. Of course, more information about how to write in your own words. If you need that, come next week. I highly recommend watching this summarizing and then watching the paraphrasing presentations together. All right, so our first sentence is built into our summary already. The details, the way that I wrote this in my own voice and included the most relevant details was, he notes that reading helps improve our memory overall by creating the opportunity to connect new memories to older ones. It also stimulates different parts of our brain and creates stronger connections, the effect of which can last for days after reading. Sure. And a concluding sentence, in these ways, reading helps strengthen our brain. So it connects, again, that circle back to the main idea to remind your reader what you were talking about in the first place. Again, there's not one right way to write this. There's lots of different ways that we could paraphrase this or express these kind of key details in the middle. But this is a good summary because it has left out unimportant information, it has left out irrelevant information, and it's completely void of small details. Only the big or larger ideas have lasted. Okay, let's summarize summaries. So summaries are part of our daily communication. We do them all the time, whether we realize this or not. But an academic summary should have certain qualities and a structure. So the qualities include short, objective, and in our own words. Summaries should begin with a sentence that introduces the source and the main idea. They should include the key points from the source that are relevant or directly connected to that main idea, and summaries should end with one sentence that restates the main idea. Following the 4 steps for writing a summary, which includes reading, identifying the main idea, highlighting or crossing out, writing that first sentence, and then filling in the details, will help you write a summary that accurately reflects the content of the source. Thank you very much for attending this presentation about summaries. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, if you're interested in any of the supports that the ASC has to offer, our website is a very good place to start. You can type www.rrc.ca/ASC and it will take you to our homepage. Click on supports for students, and then you'll see our different centers with the different supports available. Next week, October 18th, 12:15, paraphrasing. So again, you may have been wondering today, what's the difference? How are some reasons paraphrasing different? They have a very different function. So come next week to learn a little bit more about that. And as usual, there's my email. Feel free to connect with me if you have any questions. And yeah, thank you very much for coming. Have a great day, everybody.